This morning, I actually struggled trying to title this talk. Thank you so much. There's this particular moment in time where you go, "That's it," but I never had it. I never had it with this talk. So I ran through some ideas. These are some of the things. Stories from the Cross is the series that we're working on at the moment, and it's leading up to the Easter period, which is awesome. And so we're talking about the cross and heading towards the cross. But this particular section of the story that I want to unpack for you today, I struggled in giving a title, which I'm a designer and marketer by trade before anything else. And that sort of frustrated me because it gives me something to come back to. When you go through theology at college, you get told when you come up with a sermon, if you've got a tagline, tell them once, tell them again, and tell them a last time. And I've been struggling to come up with that. And the best I've come up with is Peter and the Chook. But some of the other things that I came across or flew through my mind was something like this: Chicken Little's Last Stand. I don't know why. I think I might have just read it with Matilda. This one was a bit more creative. I thought it was 33 herbs and spices. Oh, someone got it. Thank you. It's the rooster crows 3 times, and so Colonel Sanders has 11 herbs and spices, so it's 30. I just got an R over there. Thank you. This is good. And then I don't know. I was struggling. This one came to me when I was washing up. And it was the chicken found a zebra crossing. Why the chicken crossed the road? Wow, there's this section over here. There's like a time delay. One of the last ones was not so excellent song. You got to get an excellent reference. But it came up with, as I say, Peter and the Chook. So you already kind of know what we're covering today. But hopefully through this discussion that I have with you today, we can unpack not necessarily the identity of who Peter was, but who Peter was in Christ. And so that's what we're going to look today. And so I've broken it down. As I say, I couldn't come up with one slogan, so I've broken it down into multiple little sections that we're going to cover today. So there are some Bibles in the pockets in the chairs in front of you if you want to jump on and grab those. It will be on the screen, but however, it is nice to hear those pages turning. Or if you've got a device that has a Bible on it, open that up, because we're going to jump around a little bit. We're going to jump around a little bit because, as I've said many times before when I've been up the front, the Gospels all have the same stories in them, mostly. We all know how it ends. However, a Gospel is a taste, if that makes sense. Because Merrick over here, he likes chocolate ice cream, whereas I like vanilla ice cream. And so I relate to vanilla ice cream a bit more than chocolate. It's exactly the same with the Gospels. They all have the same message, but you might relate to one more than another. And so we're going to jump around in the Gospels a little bit, and we'll have a look. But let's get into it. So Jesus sees us as he intends us to be. Jesus sees us as he intends us to be. It's sort of self-explanatory, yeah? Jesus has a concept that we might not necessarily understand. Jesus has this idea, but our narrative quite often runs side by side, and we get distracted by what's happening over here. We get distracted by what's happening over there, or we open up our browsers or phones and whatever else, and we start the compare game. And so our narrative of who we are, our identity of who we are, doesn't necessarily come from Jesus. But here we've got Jesus sees us as he intends us to be. And it's exactly the same with Peter. Because when we first meet Peter in the New Testament, he is just a humble fisherman. And do you know what? Peter's dad's name was Jonah. Peter's dad's name was Jonah. I thought that was very cool because we all know the story from the Old Testament of Jonah and the big fish, yeah? And so to name a fisherman Jonah, I don't know, I thought it was pretty good. I thought it was pretty. It just might be my sick brain, but that's all right. But we've got Peter, who is the son of Jonah, who's the fisherman, right? And we have Peter that's on the shoreline, and we've got Peter that's rough, and he's got rough hands, and he's hard to look at. He's probably hard to listen to, just like me. And he's just rough around the edges altogether. But Jesus gives him this. Jesus gives him this. Well, this is actually Paul writing, and it says, "And I am certain that God, who began the good work within you, will continue his good work until it is finally finished on the day when Christ returns." And I thought this text was actually quite good because I used this text with you guys earlier in the year when we were talking about the trees, the redwood trees and all of that, and we were looking at progressing through the year. And I gave this text on the screen, and it is very good at illustrating what we're talking about, that Jesus gives us an identity within him. Then we lead to Luke chapter 9. Luke chapter 9 and 18 and verse 20, and it says, One day Jesus left the crowds to pray alone. Only his disciples were with him, and he asked them, "Who do the people say I am?" "Who do the people say I am?" "Well," they replied, "some say John the Baptist, some say Elijah, and others say you are one of the other ancient prophets risen from the dead." People are a little confused at who Jesus actually was. Then he asked them, "Who do you say I am?" Who do you say I am? And Peter, as Peter always does, he's the first to speak, he's the first to act, he's the first to get involved, and he's doing that right now. And here we have, it says, "You are the Messiah sent from God." Matthew has a different account of this, and I'm pretty sure I've got it. And it starts out the same, but we're going to just unpack the Matthew side of things. It says, when Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, Matthew gives us the details. That's the type of writer he was. Region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do the people say the Son of Man is?" And they replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others Jeremiah or one of the other prophets." "But what about you?" he asked. "Who do you say I am?" And Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." So here we have Peter giving Jesus the identity, but then Jesus continues and says this to Peter, and it's very interesting because, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah." Yes. For this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you are Peter. On this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades, or death, will not overcome it. This is actually one of the verses that has divided the church worldwide. This verse is something interesting because people take it that Peter's the rock. However, Peter's a member. Peter's a rolling stone. If you want to look at the Greek, it's actually a rolling stone. And so Peter is actually a member of the church. And so the church is built on Jesus, but Peter was the first member of the church. Does that make sense? And so it's quite simple. And then the gates of Hades, where did that come from? Well, here we go. You ready? We're going to go on a little trip because if we go back in Matthew, we've got Caesarea Philippi. And in Caesarea Philippi, there's this section of cave in a cliff somewhere, right? And it is believed that this section of cave was the gates to Hades. And Matthew tells us where Jesus is walking. And so there are some scholars that believe that Jesus was walking near this cave entrance. I don't know why he would be there and all that kind of stuff. And so this sort of prompted the response that Jesus gave to Peter. And so the people that were there used to use this cave as some sort of temple, and they used to celebrate in different disgusting ways and all of that kind of stuff. But they used to believe that this was the doors to the underworld, to Hades. And so with what Jesus had around him, we have another prompting. And so when Jesus saw what was going on and says, "I'll build my church and the gates of Hades or death will not overcome it," he's saying, Peter, it's going to last. It's going to go forever, and you are part of it. Not only are you a part of it, you're the very first member. And it's going to last throughout the ages. There's a whole lot of politics that you can get into over this text, but that's what we're going to look at this morning. And so we've got Jesus that gives Peter a new identity. Peter still saw himself as the old identity. Peter just saw himself as a fisherman, and he saw what Jesus was going on about, and he was listening to the stories and everything, but he still didn't get it. And we have constant stories of the disciples going throughout their ministry with Jesus and still not getting it. And so the verse continues on, and it talks about Jesus and Peter conversing a little bit more, and we have actually, it turns into Jesus rebuking Peter. Because Peter had the interests of an earthly kingdom, whereas Jesus, as we all know, had the future in mind. He had the future in mind, and then it goes deeper. So Jesus gave his identity to Peter. Jesus gave Peter a new identity. And now we have Jesus uses unlikely heroes. Jesus uses unlikely heroes, and it says this: the members of the council were amazed when they saw the boldness of Peter and John, for they could see that they were ordinary men with no special training in the scriptures. They also recognized them as men who had been with Jesus. You know that classic saying that Jesus doesn't call the qualified, he qualifies the call? Great bumper sticker. Great bumper sticker. And it is so true. It is so true. We've got Peter who barely knew how to tie a net. He knew how to read the waves of the Sea of Galilee. We've got Peter who could catch some fish, but then there were nights that he didn't even catch fish, but we saw that. And Jesus used that. And we've got this guy that even the leaders of the time are seeing what they can do just purely because of who they associated with. They could do amazing things. They were amazed when they saw what they were doing. Once again, it's attached to that identity. It's attached to the identity that they received from Christ. We're getting little pictures happening. This is the main one that we're going to focus on today. Jesus forgives unfaithfulness. And this is a tricky one. This is a very tricky one because this is where the chook appears. This is where the chicken appears in story. And did you know that the word chicken or chook or rooster or whatever else only happens a few times in the Bible? I went looking as soon as they gave me the topic. I went, how many times is a rooster mentioned in the Bible? It's only like 2 or 3 times, specifically a rooster. You get all these other arguments saying, well, it's talked about birds and it's talked about this and whatever else. There's occasions where hens are used, where Jesus brings all the chickens under his wings. It's a hen and all this kind of stuff. And then there's eagles, but a rooster's not really an eagle, clearly. But a rooster itself is not used in the Bible too much. In fact, Leviticus is probably the only other time that the word rooster is used. But here we have the chook. I've been spending a bit of time lately reading the Bible stories and wondering what's been happening in society around the actual story. For example, we go through a Bible with my daughter as our worship every night. And as we're reading through, we got to the birth of Jesus. And I got to thinking, man, when we have a baby and all that kind of stuff, everyone comes out of the woodwork and you get given gifts and you have time together, unless you're in lockdown when that all happened. But you get all this moment of friends, family, and even if you don't even know who they are, they come up and, hey, say g'day to you because you're holding a baby. What was happening at the time when Jesus was born? It was a census. So Joseph's family would have all been around. However, we're not told what's going on. We can only assume, and we're only told that the shepherds came. So what about the innkeeper? What about the innkeeper and his wife? They knew there was a baby coming along, but we don't get told that. It's not important. but my mind wanders quite often. And so the perspective of the Chook, and I kind of wonder if it was sort of like Chicken Little, where Chicken Little was sitting under a tree one day and he's having a daydream, and a leaf or a stick or an acorn or whatever it was falls on his tail, and Chicken Little has a moment in his own brain, and he says what? The sky is falling down. The sky is falling down. So I wonder if the rooster had a Chicken Little moment. I wonder if the rooster woke up on the morning of when all this went down and went, hang on a minute, something's going to happen. I don't know. But let's have a look. On the way, Jesus told them, tonight you will desert me. For scriptures say, God will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. The shepherd here being Jesus, and the sheep in the flock will be Jesus' followers. But after I've been raised from the dead, I'll go ahead of you to Galilee and meet you here. This is the night of. This is the night before anything's going to happen. And Jesus is once again telling his disciples what's going to happen. And did they get it? No. They're still thinking earthly kingdom. And the story continues as they move along. But before this, Peter has a moment, an out-of-brain moment, where the soldiers have come up to Jesus. And Peter reacts before he thinks. Whips out there's a whole army. Bear in mind, there's a whole guard of soldiers. And Peter pulls out a sword and tries to cut one of them. And he cuts off the ear of the servant of the high priest. But he missed. But the fact that Peter didn't think about it, he's reactive. Yeah, you getting it? He's reactive. And so we've got Peter doing all these kinds of things. And Peter declared, in Matthew continuing on, Peter declared, even if everyone else deserts you, I will never desert you. Peter not thinking before he speaks. And Jesus replied, I tell you the truth, Peter, this very night, before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times that you even know me. No, Peter insisted. Even if I have to die with you, I'll never deny you. And all the other disciples vowed the same. I've never picked up on that before, that last little section. When I was doing the preparation for this talk, I'd never picked up on that, and all the other disciples vowed the same. We don't know what happened to them because they did. They scattered. But I often wonder what would have happened if they were in that scenario. And so, picture with me, if you will. Let's go down into the streets. And it's dark and it's cold and there's little fires around the place and people are there and they're warming themselves by the fire. And then we have Peter, this fisherman who tries to hide himself, walk into the courtyard where the fire was. And we have Peter there and he walks over to the fire and someone says to Peter, hey, I recognize you. You were one of his friends. You were one of his disciples. And Peter says, no, I wasn't. I don't even know the guy. I mean, might have crossed paths at one point. Don't know him, sorry. And he slowly moves away. And he goes over to another courtyard. And he sits down and he's warming up his hands by this fire over here. And then all of a sudden, the man sitting over there wanders over and says, hey, wait a minute, I recognize you. You were doing some amazing things with this guy. In fact, you were telling us a story about him. I swear it was you. Peter, a little bit more boldly, stands up and says, no. Don't even know him. In fact, never seen him before in my life. Like, yeah, we might talk a little bit the same, but yeah, don't know him. Peter slinks away into the darkness again. Wanders right around past the other fire, making sure he sticks to the shadows. And he sits down in the corner in the dark. And the reason why he sits down in the corner in the dark is because he's denied Jesus 3 times and he still doesn't want to be recognized. And so he sits down into the dark, and people actually have to move this time to come up and accuse him of knowing who Jesus was. And so they get up and they walk over to where Peter was sitting. And they accuse him one more time. You were one of Jesus' disciples. And then finally Peter has enough. And the Bible actually says that he uses strong language to declare that he does not know who Jesus was. He does not know what Jesus was. And this is one of my daughter's picture books that tells the same story. And I just love the look on Peter's face when the rooster crows. I love the look on Peter's face when the rooster crows. But I often wonder what the rooster was doing during all this story. Because we know that Peter moved around. We know that Peter moved around. So if Peter was at this fire, was the rooster right behind him? And as Peter moved over here, did the rooster come behind just to make sure that Peter heard the rooster? I don't know. But here, the rooster crows. And then the guy in the window looking out is Jesus. I could tell you umpteen stories about times where Dad and Mum have told me to do something or not do something, and I've done it. And you know, the told you so moments. I wonder what Peter was thinking. I wonder what Peter was thinking. The next passage of images that the book shows is this, which is very interesting. We've got Peter that is heartbroken because when the rooster crows, it's almost as if a light switch is switched on, and Peter takes off and runs and hides somewhere. But I love this picture in particular, the one on your right, where we have the rooster who was involved with the whole scenario. We have the rooster coming and checking on Peter to going, "You all right, mate? You all right?" I don't know. But that I find that very cool. So we've got this moment. Peter is literally heartbroken. The Bible gives us some detail in the way that Peter's feeling, and it says his heart is broken. And we have all these altercations of Peter and the disciples, and then Jesus finally gets crucified, and he goes into the grave over the weekend, and then he rises up on Sunday morning, and Peter bolts through and goes to see the empty tomb. And then we have John. John accounts something that I find crucial to Peter and the Chook story. I find this more crucial than the rooster, which is fascinating because I was fascinated by the rooster. But this little portion of text, this little section, this little story that we have, and despite the fact that they're about to have fish for breakfast, which is weird in itself, we have a moment in Scripture that is crucial to this story. Because how many times did Peter deny Jesus? 3 times. 3 times. After breakfast, they've just had a feed on the beach. Jesus asked Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" Do you love me more than these? And Peter said, "Yes, Lord," he replied. "You know I love you. You know it. You already know that I love you, Lord." And then Jesus responds with, "Feed my lambs." And then Jesus repeated the question, and we don't know if there was any conversation in between or whatever else, but I don't know, it kind of might have been frustrating a little bit for Peter. But Jesus repeated the question, "Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me?" "Yes, Lord. You know I love you." Or would Peter have been a little bit more annoyed when he responded and just started getting a bit more angry and just said, "Yes, Lord, you know I love you." Then Jesus says, "Take care of my sheep." The analogy that we have with before the denial happens as well, we have Jesus talking about being the shepherd and scattering sheep. And it's interesting that it all ties in. And then a third time, he asked him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" key little moment in the text. If you've got a pen or paper or finger or whatever you use to highlight, this is an interesting one, because we have Peter was hurt that Jesus asked the question the third time. So we've experienced Jesus doing the denial, and we've got the Bible that tells us that he was actually heartbroken at the end of it. And now when Peter's having a conversation with Jesus, and Jesus asked him a third time, "Hey, Peter, do you love me?" Peter is hurt to know that Jesus asked him the question a third time. It was like Jesus didn't know that Peter loved him, even though he just answered it twice. It was almost as if Jesus was still questioning, which he was, but he knew. And he said, "Lord, you know everything." He said, "Lord, you are who you are. You made me who I am. You created me to be this person. And Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." And Jesus said, "Feed my sheep." Oops, sorry. Peter denied Jesus 3 times. Peter denied Jesus 3 times, and he knew he was going to, because Jesus told him. But then Jesus repaired the relationship. Jesus repaired the relationship, and I'll just go back to my title of that section. I thought I put it in earlier, but I mustn't have. Not the Chook. But Jesus forgives Peter's unfaithfulness. And I'll invite the band up. Jesus forgives Peter's unfaithfulness. And he does that for each and every one of us day by day, because no matter how hard we try, no matter who we come in contact with, even if we've been inspired by the Spirit saying this might happen and all that kind of stuff, we mess up. We stumble, we deny, we do all these kinds of things. And even if we just ignore someone in need, or whether you have that little moment of, should I go and talk to that person or whatever else, and we ignore it, we lose these opportunities. There might not be a chook involved unless you're at KFC. But do you know what? Jesus forgives our unfaithfulness. We just have to be willing to answer that question, because Jesus comes to each and every one of us and says, "Hey, do you love me? Hey, do you love me?" And then I love the fact that Jesus then tells Peter to do something with that love. And the question from today is simply this: do you love Jesus? And what are you going to do with that love?